How many of us picture Vikings as bloodthirsty raiders, barreling down the coastlines in dragon-headed ships, hurling axes and plundering communities indiscriminately? That image, immortalized in countless movies and TV shows, has cemented itself in popular imagination. But what if I told you this wasn't the full story? In fact, the truth is far more nuanced. The Vikings, those fiercely independent Norsemen of the late 8th to early 11th centuries, were explorers, artisans, traders, and farmers long before they were ever known as raiders. Who were they really, and how did they leave their mark? Not just in the annals of history, but on the modern world we inhabit today? To uncover the truth about the Vikings, we need to sail through the fog of myth and into the shores of reality. Let's start by setting the record straight about one thing. Most Vikings weren't warriors. That's right, only a small portion of Viking society engaged in raiding or warfare. The majority of these Scandinavian people were farmers, cultivating hardy grains like barley and rye, and raising livestock in the uneven terrain of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Their farms were the backbone of daily life, and survival depended on knowledge of the land, the weather, and even cooperative relationships with their neighbors. Unlike the caricature of chaotic marauders, Viking communities were highly organized, with a system of governance and laws. In fact, the Vikings had councils, or things, where free people gathered to debate matters of local concern. Can you imagine Vikings amicably hashing out disputes or electing leaders? Well, they did. And their legal system, based on the concept of compensating wrongs with fines or reparations, served as the foundation for some modern legal practices. But what about their iconic image? Dragon-proud ships. Helmets. By the way, there's no evidence they wore horns on their helmets. And a lust for treasure? That leads us into the heart of their seafaring nature. Here's a surprising fact. The Vikings weren't just raiders. They were global traders. Those sleek longships weren't exclusively employed for raiding coastal settlements. They also played a pivotal role in creating trade networks that spanned much of the known world. Imagine this. A Viking ship laden not with stolen loot, but with fine wool, dried fish, and expertly crafted jewelry. Now picture that ship docking at a bustling marketplace in Constantinople or Baghdad. These aren't flights of fancy, they're facts. The Vikings were skilled traders and made invaluable connections across Europe, the Middle East, and beyond. Silver from Arab caliphates, silk from Byzantine workshops, and spices from the Far East all made their way into Viking hands, and in turn, Scandinavian homes. Archaeological evidence found in places as distant as Newfoundland in North America and the Abbasid Caliphate in modern-day Iraq shows how far the Vikings ventured, not just as invaders, but as negotiators, merchants, and travelers. They didn't just raid monasteries for gold, they exchanged goods, diffused ideas, and connected cultures. Their seafaring prowess, quite literally, wove the fabric of medieval globalization. Of course, we can't ignore their infamous raids. Yes, the raids happened, and yes, they were brutal. But let's contextualize them. In a world teetering with geopolitical upheavals, the Vikings capitalized on vulnerabilities rather than creating chaos completely out of thin air. Coastal raids often targeted regions weakened by internal strife, political instability, or religious divisions. And those churches and monasteries? They were easy targets not just because of their wealth, but because they were poorly defended. However, the Vikings weren't continuously pillaging from dawn to dusk. For many Viking groups, raids were seasonal activities, an opportunistic means of acquiring wealth, not a lifelong pursuit. What's more, some of the Vikings' motivations for conquest were born of necessity. Scandinavian lands were resource poor, forcing population spills into more fertile regions in England, Ireland, and northern France. The raiding, conquering, and colonizing were, in part, an extension of migration. That migration led to fascinating transformations. Take Normandy, for example. The name itself means land of the Northmen, a lasting legacy from Viking settlers who integrated into local European communities. Rather than imposing their ways, many Vikings adopted the customs, languages, and religions of the regions they moved into, even becoming devout Christians in later generations. Over time, they left behind hybrid cultures, unique blends of Scandinavian and European traditions. This brings us to another overlooked aspect of Viking life: their cultural sophistication. The Vikings weren't just warriors, but skilled craftsmen, poets, and storytellers. Norse mythology, with its tales of Odin, Thor, and the world tree Yggdrasil, resonates deeply even today, inspiring everything from blockbuster movies to fantasy novels. But their artistry went well beyond myth-making. Runestones, etched with intricate carvings and inscriptions, tell powerful stories of Viking lives and achievements. Their jewelry, ornately designed with patterns of animals, knots, and geometric shapes, was a marvel of craftsmanship. Even their ships, those iconic longboats, were more than tools of war. They were technological masterpieces, capable of navigating rivers and open seas alike. These designs later influenced shipbuilding across Europe, a testament to the Norse people's ingenuity. And let's not overlook their contributions to governance. Ever heard of the Magna Carta, that cornerstone of Western democracy? It has subtle echoes of Viking culture. The Norse idea of shared governance and mutual obligation of leaders and their people made its way into the principles adopted by English law after Viking settlements left lasting marks on the territories they ruled. But beyond their physical contributions, the Vikings' core values, bold exploration, adaptability, and resilience, carry universal lessons. They were people of contradictions, fiercely protective yet open to new worlds, deeply traditional yet unafraid to innovate. And, despite their reputation as solitary raiders, they thrived on community and collaboration both at home and abroad. So, why have the Vikings been stuck in the role of ruthless barbarians? Much of it boils down to biased accounts written by the people they raided. Medieval monks were often the chroniclers of Viking attacks, and can we really blame them for painting the Norsemen as demonic invaders? After all, a room full of plundered religious artifacts isn't likely to produce glowing reviews of the looters. Then there's the enduring influence of modern media. Hollywood, literature, and even video games have chosen the most dramatic aspects of Viking life to build an archetype. Bearded men with horns wielding axes while screaming across the battlefield. The truth, as we've seen, is far richer and far more complex. As we close the chapter on Viking myths, let's not imagine history as something we conquer, like an enemy coastline, but rather as something we explore, like the Vikings themselves once explored the unknown. Their legacy isn't any one thing. It's warships and wheat fields, poetry and politics, swords and silk. It's messy and multifaceted, and that's what makes it great. So, the next time someone draws horns on a Viking helmet or calls them savages, you'll know better. Because the Vikings weren't just conquerors of land, they were navigators of uncharted waters, carriers of culture, and shapers of the medieval world. Their story is no less thrilling for its truth. In fact, it's even more extraordinary.